Mr. President, I'm proud to come to the floor today to ask for unanimous consent on this bipartisan resolution expressing solidarity with the people of Cuba. This resolution passed out of the Foreign Relations Committee by a voice vote with overwhelming bipartisan support. I want to thank the senior senator from Florida for his partnership on this resolution, which has the support of Senators Durbin, Kane, Senator Risch, the ranking member on the Foreign Relations Committee, as well as many others on both sides of the aisle. In passing this resolution today, the U.S. Senate can send a powerful message about the truly historic events occurring in Cuba in recent weeks. On July 11th, in an unprecedented wave of demonstrations across the island, the Cuban people peacefully took to the streets and raised their voices to call for freedom and an end to tyranny. We saw the courage of the Cuban people. Images of Cubans chanting "Abajo la dictadura," which means "or down with the dictatorship," and singing "Patria y Vida," or fatherland and life, spread around the globe. Yet the Diaz-Canel regime responded with an authoritarian crackdown and violent repression out of a fear of losing its iron grip over the Cuban people. The regime cut the internet to stop the Cuban people from accessing social media, a tool they were bravely using to open the eyes of the world. Who does that? Only a country that fears its people shuts down the internet. But it was too late. The truth went viral. The regime has arrested more than 700 people, and most remain incommunicado. Dozens more are already being subjected to summary trials without access to legal defense or even a veneer of due process. Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights have all spoken out against the Cuban regime's campaign of repression. President Biden rightfully and repeatedly denounced the regime's actions and has announced 2 rounds of global Magnitsky sanctions on human rights abusers. The president has brought together allies of Cuban freedom, both at home and abroad. On Friday, the president convened a meeting of Cuban-American leaders to discuss this crisis and hear our suggestions on how to best support the pro-democracy efforts underway in Cuba. Last week, Secretary of State Blinken led a coalition of 20 countries in a joint statement to express international solidarity with the Cuban people and their rights to freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom to determine their own future. And while important steps are being taken, more needs to be done. The Cuban people in this unprecedented hour of uncertainty and need cannot afford anything less than our full support. With this resolution, the Senate will add its voice to the ongoing efforts and reinforce U.S. solidarity with the Cuban people and their efforts to restore democracy and human rights in their country. The same resolution that is also being offered in the House of Representatives on the same bipartisan basis. So therefore, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 111, S-Res 310. Further, that the committee reported substitute amendment to the resolution be agreed to, the resolution as amended be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
The senator from Florida.
Mr. President, I rise today in solidarity with the brave Cuban people fighting for freedom. For decades, the Cuban people suffered atrocities, oppression, and misery at the hands of the illegitimate communist Castro regime. I've repeatedly told the story of Celia Villaleon, a Cuban woman who was attacked by communist Cuban security forces in 2015. They cut off her hand and stuck her arm in the mud to make sure it got infected. Her crime, she complained that the regime was going to shut down a school in her neighborhood. I've spoken to brave leaders like Jose Daniel Ferrer and the courageous members of his Patriotic Union of Cuba who are fighting every day to defend human rights, freedom, and the democratic movement in Cuba. Jose Daniel Ferrer is currently being detained by the communist regime. His family doesn't know where he is. Activists like Jose Daniel Ferrer and the artists of the San Isidro movement are the future of Cuba, not the ruthless communist regime. This is the same communist regime that for decades has been the root of the instability we see across Latin America. The communist Cuban regime props up other dangerous dictators like Maduro in Venezuela and Ortega in Nicaragua, threatening the region and the national security of the United States. What we are seeing now in Cuba should send a clear message to the world. Communism is a failed ideology that does nothing but lead to suffering and oppression. Communism doesn't work, socialism doesn't work. The people of Cuba are crying out for freedom. They are denouncing the oppressive communist rule that has brought ruin to their nation for more than 60 years. This disgusting assault on the people of Cuba cannot go unchecked. I very much appreciate my colleagues' efforts to condemn the atrocities of the regime. But this resolution is missing one thing. These atrocities are undeniably linked to communism. I stand today to offer a friendly amendment that simply condemns communism in this resolution, labeling the Cuban dictators Diaz-Canel and Raul Castro what they are, a ruthless communist Cuban regime. In America, we understand the value and importance of freedom in our everyday lives. It is our duty to support and stand up for those who are oppressed by dictators and denied the right to live freely. It is our duty to speak the truth about communism. I stand proudly with the heroic freedom fighters across Cuba that have taken to the streets determined to regain their freedom and put an end to the communist Castro dictatorship. To the people of Cuba, you're not alone. Together, we will defeat communism. The freedom of Cuba is closer than ever, and we're not going to stop until we see a new day of freedom, democracy, and patria vida in Cuba. I urge my colleagues to support my important amendment today. Therefore, I ask that the Senator modify his request to include my amendment, which is at the desk, so that the resolution as amended be agreed to, the preamble as amended be agreed to, and the motions to reconsider be considered made up and laid upon the table.
Does the senator so modify his request?
Mr. President, reserving the right to object. I totally agree that the Castro regime and its prodigy is a communist, socialist dictatorship, a tyranny. Before the senator was ever in this institution or involved with the issue for 30 years, I've been saying exactly that. The senator, however, knows that in order to accept an amendment to a resolution that has been hotlined in both caucuses, this process could not move forward. I cannot simply accept the amendment. I'd have to go through the whole process. And the fact of the matter is, I think there is a fierce urgency of now. This resolution already has the approval of 99 senators. And if the senator were to insist on his amendment, the junior senator from Florida would be the only one standing in its way. This bipartisan resolution is co-sponsored by 19 senators. The initiative is led by Senator Rubio, the senior senator from Florida, the ranking member of the Senate Subcommittee on Western Hemisphere Affairs. It's sponsored by Senator Risch, the ranking member of the full Foreign Relations Committee. It's supported by Senator Cruz and Romney and Haggerty, all of them leading Republican voices on the Foreign Relations Committee. And with the strong Republican backing, the Foreign Relations Committee passed this resolution last Wednesday on a voice vote with overwhelming bipartisan support. Now, intervening, we've had this infrastructure bill, and so we're here trying to get this finally done. We have an opportunity to act today and send a powerful bipartisan message in support of the Cuban people and condemning the regime's brutal repression. Now, I personally agree with the sentiment of the junior senator from Florida, but that reality is the reality that has existed. We're talking about the reality today of trying to send a bipartisan, bicameral message. This resolution already condemns its present Cuban dictator, Miguel Diaz-Canel, by name for his direct role in ordering a violent crackdown against the Cuban people. It also documents the mass wave of arrests in Cuba. It denounces in plain language the regime's brutal violence, its use of summary trials to arbitrarily sentence protesters who have no access to a lawyer. So let me be clear. I've led U.S. and international efforts to oppose Cuba's communist dictatorship for 30 years in the Congress, including my role in helping create the Cuban Democracy Act and drafting the Libertad Act. No one in Congress has a longer or more unwavering track record than I do when it comes to condemning the Cuban regime. But this resolution is a strong rebuke of the regime's recent actions, and it also achieves the bipartisan opportunity we need for Senate approval. There comes a time when we have to put actions over words. Today, the Senate has a chance to act. We should not delay another hour in passing this resolution. And because that's exactly what would happen, I have to object to the senator's amendment.
Objection is heard to the modification.
Is there objection to the original request?
Is there objection to the original request?
Yeah. Mr. President,
Senator from Florida.
reserving the right to object. Let me just read this. All I'm saying is the resolution would add, condemns the murderous Communist Party of Cuba for decades of oppression against the Cuban people, the destruction of the Cuban embassy, our economy, and the destructive spread of communism in the Western Hemisphere. I wish my colleague from New Jersey would accept my simple but important friendly amendment, but I will consent to allowing this resolution to move forward. I will always stand proudly with the brave people in Cuba fighting for their freedom and against the brutal communist regime which continues to oppress them. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Without objection. So ordered. The senator from
Very briefly,
New
Mr.
Jersey.
President, I just want to appreciate that the senator from Florida, while I share his sentiments, did not press forward on insisting the amendment, which would have delayed this. And most importantly, I think the Cuban people are the ones who are going to thank you as well. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.